next speaker was appointed to her role by Mayor de Blasio himself. She directs the Mayor's Office of Technology. What's laughing? Even you're laughing. So this is good. She directs the Mayor's Office of Technology and Innovation with city-wide responsibility over the New York City technology ecosystem. Please welcome the CTO of New York City, Minerva Tantoco.
So, hi, I'm Minerva. How are you? Okay, you got your lunch, you're kind of like falling asleep. I'll try and pep you up a little bit. I'm going to talk very quickly because I want to catch up on time and also because I'm from New York. I'm going to talk about two main things and then I'll introduce a colleague of mine as well. So really, it's about two big trends in government. One is Internet of Things, and second is the rise of data science in government. Is that interesting to you guys? All right, good. As Eric mentioned, I was appointed in September of 2014 as the first ever Chief Technology Officer of New York. Now, I have lived in New York since I was 4 years old. I grew up in Flushing, Queens. I went to all New York City public schools. I went to Bronx Science, yeah. So this is a very New York thing, and after 30 years in the private sector, as a Chief Technology Officer for 17 years, as a startup founder, as a head of product management for Palm, the last 10 years in financial services, I decided to leave the private world and go into government. Ooh. I know, like what? And I'll tell you, there's a few reasons to do it, but more importantly, as you can see, that is where I sit, where it says insert CTO here. I am the only nerd in City Hall for the moment, on the second floor in the bullpen. And I run the Mayor's Office of Tech and Innovation, and really the goal is to create a citywide tech strategy to make New York City the most innovative and tech-friendly city in the world. Now this is comprised of answering two major questions. One, how many people think government does tech really well? Yeah. Right, so question one was, how do we help government do tech better? So here's where I borrow from my CTO playbook and my private sector playbook, and we help to make government do tech a little better than it does now. Really recognizing the importance of technology and actually the opportunity and power that technology can have in transforming how government works. And so the second question is kind of the sort of converse of that. Not just how can we help government do tech better, but how do we use technology and innovation to make government better? That's, in fact, the more important and more intriguing question that sort of enticed me to go. I have a bunch of other cool things, like I wanted the first CTO of New York to be a woman from Queens. And I wanted the opportunity and platform to promote diversity in technology. Because after 30 years in the private sector, I was very often the only woman in the room as a CTO. So, yeah, thank you. I know. All right. So that little commercial over. Thank you, Jonathan. So, what's the tech strategy? It's really not just about the tech, it's about the humans, right? So, it's about the talent, the access to technology and innovation. So, as many CTO roles are, they're not purely about the tech, it's always about the humans. We issued last year the Plan for One New York. It's a vision for the city in the year 2025. And so all the things we do are to promote and use technology to support those goals. So talent, it's really about how do we develop more local talent in New York City? How do we make a tech ecosystem or a tech community that is for all New Yorkers? Because tech is in everything, it should be for everyone. So there's a ton of programs, you can just check on the website. We have a lot going on in New York City. We are partnering with City University of New York. We partner with Microsoft on Tech Jobs Academy. We have our Tech Talent Pipeline. We have a bunch of great programs to help assure that people who wouldn't ordinarily have the opportunity to study programming, study data science, that we find those. Because we know that the next Einstein is going to be a woman, of color, right? So, next. Access. This was really shocking to me. It wasn't something I really thought about. I always griped about my cable bill, but I did not realize that 22% of New Yorkers do not have access to broadband at home. And also, when you go below the poverty line, that number goes up to 36%. So what does that mean? If you're cut off from the internet, or if you don't have ready access to the internet, you're pretty much cut off from the digital economy, from education, from finding a job. So this is a really important and critical issue for us in the city of New York, and we focus on that as part of our tech strategy. And then finally, and one of the great examples, how many of you have heard of the links? We're turning all the payphones into free Wi-Fi hotspots. So that was one of the programs that we initiated in late 2014. I helped to develop the data strategy and the cybersecurity and privacy policies for these. And now it's being led by the Department of IT, who's implementing them. There's a few hundred now out in the city streets. Another great now we're getting to the IoT part, right? Because that's sort of a payphone didn't used to be connected, but now they are, and they're things, and they're interneted, so Internet of Things. Another great example, we actually have a whole booklet on all the smart city stuff that we've done, Internet of Things stuff. One of my favorite examples is traffic signal prioritization. So we ran a pilot. Governments don't do a lot of pilots, but we're trying to get them to do more, where we put GPS on an MTA bus, and there was a sensor in the traffic lights run by the New York City Department of Transportation. And if they detected a bus, they would prioritize public transportation. And we ran this pilot, and we discovered that it reduced public transit times by 20%. So this pilot was so successful that we're now going to expand that to all 5 boroughs. All of these great Internet of Things, I love to say, we couldn't have done it without collecting the data. It's the data, stupid, right? Finally, innovation. So this is kind of like how we do things differently. Not only doing innovative things, but doing things in an innovative way. Public-private partnerships. Link NYC is a franchise. The partnership with MTA on the traffic signal prioritization. We've also got wireless water meters that detect leaks. And so it saves water, it saves money. There's all kinds of great examples. We have problem-based challenges. We issued a call for innovation, a CFI last year, on how to solve the broadband issue. And like I said, prototypes and pilots. So the last little bit here, how many of you worked on sort of Internet of Things projects? All right, great, yeah. So, this is not new news, but for those of you who've been under a rock, by 2020 there will be more than 50 billion connected devices, and more. It's not just watches, it's going to be embedded technology, and governments in particular stand to really gain a lot of value from Internet of Things. Imagine that we could collect temperature data, pollution data, vibration data all over city streets. The potential to measure and put investments where we can demonstrate the best value is very important. Oh, something, thank you. So, you've seen some of these around. You've seen the big bellies. Those are sort of connected garbage cans. They are self-aware. They know when they're full. They're solar powered, and so when they're full, then they get empty, and it saves a lot of pickups where it's only half full, for example. And taxis. How many people use taxi occasionally? I'm a cyclist, so yeah. But we're starting to work with connected. I use Way to Ride sometimes. And in some of these, the Mayor's Office of Tech and Innovation, my team, is starting to pilot some interesting ideas what to do with those taxi TVs. Finally, on the lower right, you'll see the SUFA. There's another picture of it next. Yeah, okay. that is, we're just starting a pilot here. We're working with the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation on a smart park bench. What is that? Well, that is actually SUFA was a company that was spun up out of MIT Media Lab, 2 women founders, by the way. And we just bought a few of these smart park benches and trying them out in High Bridge Park. That's the park at 175th in Amsterdam that connects Manhattan to the Bronx via a bridge. We wanted to do 2 things. We want to see, as one of the new Plan 1 NYC refurbished parks, we wanted to track usage. And normally you would send a person out there with a clicker, you know, and assuming that they didn't like spend their whole day doing other things, you could count how many people used it. But that's not 24/7. That's not, you know, in every kind of weather. But this bench actually will track how many phones ping it and pass by. Totally anonymous, but it'll ping it. How does it do that? Where does it get its power? Well, actually, it's solar powered. So it gets all of its power from that panel in the middle, and it's a place to sit, and you can charge your phone on it, right? But instead of buying a gazillion of these things and then hoping they work, we just bought a few. We're working with the Parks Department to see how well it works, what kind of maintenance, what kind of operation, what kind of concerns, how well does it hold up with weather. This is an important part of the pilot. Okay, so here's something more nerdy. Ready for something nerdy? You can go to nyc.gov/IoT. So what we realized was city agencies were starting to do more and more IoT things. They didn't really have sort of like guardrails or guidelines or how to do it. Because when you buy a park bench or a light bulb, it's very different from buying a connected park bench or a connected light bulb. Now you're buying technology, right? And so how do you set up guidelines for government agencies to use technology or not think of that park bench as just a park bench anymore? So we created the New York City first ever IoT guidelines. We spent a year, worked with over 40 different industry partners, private sector partners, everyone from the ACLU to IBM worked on this with us, several other governments. We put out these guidelines for city agencies, but we made them public because if you want to work with the city or if you want a checklist of things that you want to think about when you're doing IoT, we put them into 5 major categories: privacy and transparency, data management, infrastructure, security, operations, and sustainability. These are considerations that don't apply when you buy a light bulb, but they do when you buy a connected light bulb. So finally, you can look into some more of our great stuff. Obviously, you can find out about our Smarter Parks initiative. Actually, the park bench is just a small piece of what the Department of Parks is doing. They really want to double down and use data on how do we create better public spaces and measure the benefits of those public spaces. And of course, how many people use the Open Data Portal, New York City Open Data Portal? Right? If you haven't, please go. It's the largest open data portal in the country with over 500 data sets of public and open data that you can use and play with. So that's right. Yeah. So I wanted to give up some of my time to really give you guys a really juicy example of how we actually use data on the ground in the government. So I've invited my colleague, Jonathan Geis. He's the Director of Analytics for the Department of Education. He's going to talk about a real use case of how we use data analytics in the Department of Education. By the way, we're hiring. Go to nyc.gov/techjobs. or come to the government. It's okay, the water's fine. So without any further ado, my colleague Jonathan Geis, Director of Analytics.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to bring it down to a little more local and practical use. So specifically within the Department of Education. And so I work at the Office of District Planning, where we work on a number of proposals. And the one I'm going to discuss is school rezonings. So I'll first give a little overview of how zoning works in the city, and this is school zoning, and talk about the way we're currently using data to project demand and future challenges with our current models, and how we hope that with more data sources, more different ways of looking at the data that's available, maybe some untapped sources of data, we can get better at predicting what's really going to be needed in a city as varied and diverse as New York City. Thank you. So just brief overview of New York City. It's the school system is broken down into 32 community school districts geographically. Staten Island gets its own district for the borough. Otherwise, there are several districts for each borough. Every school district has a community education council. It's local representatives elected by the different school boards, and they are close partners in school rezonings. And specifically, I'm going to focus on elementary schools. And most elementary schools in New York City are zoned. What that means is that there's essentially a catchment area, which is a little lines that you can see that are drawn around that school. And depending on the student's address, that student receives priority to a seat in that school. Now,
I thought they had to go to that school. I'm from New York.
You receive priority to that. So there's more choice, but that's typically how it works.
So you can take people out of your district now?
But we can talk more about like the specifics about diversity. Yeah.
Because I hear they changed the ruling.
It depends on the specific school, but typically the way it works with the zone school is that a student has ideally a guaranteed seat. It's not always the case in overcrowded schools, but a seat there. But if there's space in another school, there's no forcing a student to attend their zone school. They just have priority to attend their zone school.
No, I mean, I don't want to stop your person. When did they change it?
It's been like that, I believe, at least the last 10 years. I don't know how it was before that, but at least, yeah.
Sorry, go on.
So along with zone and schools, there are choice schools that are open to all students. Some of them sometimes based on a screened criteria, and some of them it's just as long as there are seats. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So why do we rezone? So we've got our current system, our current layout of the school zones, and just to go over some of the examples where we would need it to rezone is when there's overcrowding. So if we see one school is overcrowded, the other a neighboring school has a lot of space and open seats, we may want to change to redraw the zone lines in order to shift some of those students and some of those families to the other school. Just so you know, we never ask students to actually change schools. It's always about new students coming into the system who would be redirected to the new school. So it's never about telling the family you have to leave your existing school and shift to another one. One of the kind of exciting places where we get to rezone is when there's a new building that's built. As some of you may be familiar with, real estate in New York City is really tough to find. And so when we actually can secure a new place, build a new school, that's always a nice way to go to the community to say we need to redraw the zone lines in order to create a zone for this new school. And some of the factors we look at, the capacity in the schools. We look at where students choose to attend. One of the really challenging things to identify and to determine is what the demand is going to be. How many students do we need to plan for, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And we look at, we have a few sources of data we look at, and then some of the factors we look at. So we look at the historical number of students living in the zone and the anticipated growth due to either trends that we've already identified or upcoming residential construction. And we partner with the Department of Buildings to get those numbers. So I'm just, then specifically with the zone lines, when we're redrawing them, we want to take a few things into account. The first thing is to get that kind of target number of students that would be living in that catchment area, which as I mentioned, that's really that moving target. And other factors we want to take into consideration, residential construction. So depending really on the neighborhood in New York City, there's very different levels of growth that we need to plan for. We want to take into account diversity. It's you may know housing in New York City can sometimes really be segregated from if you're on one side of this road versus another side of that road. So we want to take that into account when we're drawing zone lines, not to create kind of really segregated schools and segregated zones. Another thing we take into account is geographic barriers. So highways, bridges, rivers, you really have to know, maybe some dangerous neighborhoods that students would have to cross through. So it's not all about distance, because the other part is really travel distance. Ideally, we want to minimize how far students, especially elementary students, how far they might have to walk to their school. Next slide. So this is a map that shows rezoning we did. Actually, I think it's in the Flushing area of Queens. So you can tell the green zone there is PS11. The blue one is PS152. So those were the current zones. And we got funding to build a new school there. So it's Q339. And we drew a line, basically the black line, outline you see there is that new zone, which shrunk the existing zones by those amounts in order to reduce how many students would be coming into those other two schools, and to create a new enrollment for the new school. So that's the simple, a very kind of simple rezoning, only 2 schools involved, and creating a new zone. Yes?
Did you use this data to plan where the school would be?
Yes, so do we use the data to plan where this school will be? Yes, definitely. So this, identifying really the sites, we work on this in partnership with the School Construction Authority, which is actually a somewhat parallel agency to the Department of Education. And so at first it's identifying where there's what's called the capital plan, which is where the funding should be allocated for the next 5-10 years, based on where we see overcrowding and where we predict growth. So this is a good segue. So the way the School Construction Authority, they partner with third-party demographers and based on census data and residential construction, to identify kind of the next areas of growth, identify kind of current overcrowding, and what, as I mentioned, New York City really has different pockets sometimes of growth, different parts. I mean, lately, Brooklyn has had really just these different areas that have seen huge amounts of growth. Other parts of, all over the city, really, you can identify some areas where we have buildings that are, maybe a quarter empty, and other parts where we just cannot find enough seats. You may have heard about transportable classroom units, which are trailers that have been placed in playgrounds. It's an initiative of the mayor to actually get those removed, and that's kind of a stopgap in the short term. But in the long term, the School Construction Authority identifies the kind of where the growth is going to be in order to build. However, we cannot say, well, we can't pinpoint the specific intersection and say, build us a school here. As you know, there's just not that much available real estate in New York City to be able to be exact with where we want it to be. Yeah.
In your map there, okay. PS 152 obviously takes up more geographic area, and I would assume that the population density is not homogeneous. Otherwise, don't you have to move that dividing line closer to, let's say, Queens Boulevard to, cover more of the student body?
Yes, so precisely. So the question is about why, how do we take into account population density and how it's not just about the geographic area. And I believe maybe in the next slide, actually. Yes, so I'll talk about that with the sources of data. So currently, the way we project the number of students living within a zone, so originally it was only based on historical student enrollment. So we looked at the last 10 years of data, and every student kind of has the school they're attending and their address. From there, we geocode them, and so we work with in GIS with Geographic Information System to plot those students and see, well, how many students are captured within the zone. So you're very much on point as far as the student density. There's also not all schools are created alike as to how many students they can serve. So PS 152 is a larger school than PS 111, and the population density, especially there are parts of Queens, and again, this is true in many other parts, when you've got large residential complexes, you can have many more students coming from one address because there's a higher tower, many more residential units. So what we've done already as far as to kind of to provide more layers to our data and to have more of this better projections, not just based on trend, is on historical data, is so incorporating census data through the school construction authority, as well as residential construction. And we have a housing multiplier adjusted for every borough that comes from the New York City Environmental Quality Review that projects, let's say, okay, there's 100 residential units that are being planned. In Brooklyn, we anticipate 4 new kindergartners to come in every year from those 100 units. In Manhattan, we anticipate only 2 students to be coming in from those units. So that's how we're currently projecting students. And okay, so what we are planning on, so part of what we're working on with the Mayor's Office of Technology and Innovation, and where we want to kind of better partner with other agencies as well, is to bring in additional sources of data to provide a more precise and especially geographically precise and more nuanced projections. So for example, the housing multiplier we use at this point is at the borough level. So we have one number for Brooklyn, one number for Manhattan. And we believe that with looking at additional sources of data, we'll be able to have a multiplier, for example, that instead of treating all of Brooklyn as one, the same way we have different multipliers based on the borough, we could have different multipliers based on the specific neighborhood. Develop a model that's more nuanced based on the specific characteristics of every neighborhood, the specific kind of trends that we may see across different parts of the city. And we are partnering with the Mayor's Office of Technology and Innovation to reach out to, and we're planning to reach out to external partners also who work in the field of big data, and to learn more about what kind of other sources of data we can look at and how to incorporate those to develop more sophisticated and reliable projection models.